Shabbat Shalom. Good morning, everybody, and happy June. I wanted to invite you to join me in the singing of our extra joyful opening song this morning, This Little Light of Mine. We'll share the lyrics on the screen and go ahead and sing with me. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Gonna take this light around the world, and I'm gonna let it shine. I'm gonna take this light around the world, and I'm gonna let it shine. Gonna take this light around the world, and I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. I won't let anyone blow it out. I'm gonna let it shine. I won't let anyone blow it out. I'm gonna let it shine. I won't let anyone blow it out. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Every day, I'm gonna let my little light shine. As we celebrate together the opening of the first Shabbat of Pride Month, and we gather to celebrate that which makes us sacred, the divine spark within each of us that makes us holy, we turn to those words, a very beloved gospel tune that has proliferated across North America. It comes in lots of different formulations depending on where you're singing it. That's Rafi's version. It's on a tape that my son adores. And there couldn't be a better message for starting out Pride Month and allowing each of us to shine exactly who we are every day of the year. It need not be June, and it need not be the anniversary of Stonewall. But there's something extra special about the flavor of time that happens when summer is beginning and Pride is drawing ever, ever closer. At CBST, we treat Pride as one of our high holy days. And so with the start of a new year, as it were, and a new Pride, I want to thank you for joining us on this Shabbat morning to be in community with Congregation Beit Simchat Torah, the LGBTQ synagogue of New York City. I'm Rabbi Yael Rapport. I'm the associate rabbi here at CBST. And today I am delighted to be joined in leadership by the Reverend Liz Edman. So I first met Liz when she emailed me if it would be okay for an Episcopalian priest to take a Hebrew class that we were offering at CBST. And I enthusiastically responded, absolutely, that's very exciting. And ever since that Lair House class several years ago, Liz has been a dedicated member of the CBST community. And she's been a part of our Friday night services, and she's been a thoughtful and articulate voice on Jewish tradition and also the traditions that we share with Christianity and around the world. And singularly, Reverend Edman has put forward a beautiful philosophical pathway that she calls queer virtue. And as an Episcopalian priest, she approaches this from the context of her tradition. But I've been so struck by the way that she speaks in a prophetic voice about what queer identity means in terms of living an ethical life, and specifically in terms of living a life of faith, that it is an essential idea It is not a marginalized experience, but rather the idea that we should be living in community with a set of orientations that lead us to change the world and to think about those who are being left at the sidelines, to imagine the audacity that we have the ability to make the world better and deeper and more beautiful. It's a very queer idea. And so if we were to put our queer identities at the center of who we are as religious people, as Christians, as Jews, as any faith that I can practically think of, the impact is extraordinary. And so I've invited Reverend Edman to share with us this morning the steps along this pathway. And I think that we'll all be struck by the universal nature of this message. It'll open our eyes to the consideration of how who we are and who we love and how we treat others is at the very core of our Jewish faith. It'll introduce some of us who are less familiar with Christian traditions to the overlap of these thoughtful LGBTQ religious spaces. And to be transparent, the very first gay synagogues in the United States were modeled after queer Christian communities that came together to celebrate both their religious and their sexual and their gender identities. And we definitely stole the idea from them. In LA, there's an incredible church called MCC, and there were so many Jewish participants in the LGBTQ Christian group that the group leader finally said, haven't you guys ever considered like maybe starting your own Jewish group? And following that, BCC, Beth Chaim Chadashim, the very first LGBTQ synagogue, who beat us by 3 months in 1973 in their founding, was born. Across the map of queer religious community, there are so many places that we come together and share ideas and visions and questions. And so on this first Shabbat of Pride Month, the Shabbat where we read a very queer Haftarah that we will be studying all together, I can't imagine whose voice I would rather hear. We will be interspersing our service with meditations that Reverend Edman will offer, but there will still be opportunity to move through the Matbea Tefillah, the prescribed order of service. As always, we will have some silent space in the vicinity of the Amidah for anybody to move through the entirety of the Amidah, or your own yoga practice, or your own meditation practice, or just to sit and take a breath. There'll be an opportunity to pray for the healing of ourselves and others. There will be a recitation of Kaddish, and there will be music and discussion and many deep breaths. But without further ado, I want to introduce the Reverend Liz Edman.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Rapport, and Shabbat Shalom, everybody. It is such a delight to be here with you this morning. As Rabbi Rapport just said, what I'm going to offer are brief little meditations that sort of spell out a path. These are steps on a path, and they are interestingly keyed to, they happen, I guess, to align with steps on our liturgical path as well. And the first one is called identity. I was born in Fort Smith, Arkansas in 1962. The world I grew up in was defined by rigid binaries: white, black, capitalist, communist, north, south, oh yeah, and male, female. All of them were problematic, but that last one, male and female, really didn't work for this tomboy. When I was 5, I had to drag my mother into the boys section of the shoe store to look at sneakers. Mama, come here, let me show you the ones I want. My family taught me, be who you are, Elizabeth, even when other people give you guff. When I presented my sneakers to the clerk, he said, those are boys' shoes. Mama didn't miss a beat. That's right, she said. Size 4, please. My mother was a singer. Being who she was meant having the courage to witness God's presence in the sacred music she loved. You could see her put her whole trust in God, entering into this space between heaven and earth where her best voice, her best self emerged. Faith in God is all about being who you are. As we say in the prayer, Elohai Neshama, the soul you gave me, God, is pure. You breathed it into me. As a Christian, I've always thought that's the essence of what Jesus was trying to tell his followers. Orient your whole being to the sacred, he insisted. Not because I'm telling you to, not because it's what scripture demands, do it, because it's who you are. It's who God created you to be. God made us to be complex creatures, every one of us, for a reason. So if you want to honor God, here's the first step. Know who you are. Be who you are. Be the person God created you to be.
As we enter into the morning blessings, the Birchot HaShachar, I want to invite everybody to sit with intention. So you probably sat down purposefully when you logged into the Zoom meeting, but I want you to change your posture a little bit so that you're sitting thoughtfully, as it were. Try putting both of your feet flat on the floor. If they weren't there already, if you can. And see if you can bring right angles from your feet to your knees so that they're not stretched out in front of you, they're not locked behind you. They make gentle right angles. And then shift around in your seat a little bit so you can see what it feels like to try and sit equally on both halves of your tush. Not listing one way or the other, that might be more comfortable, but to sit intentionally, evenly spread on your seat so that your back can feel the natural curves of your spine. Maybe rock back and forth a little bit to see exactly where that center line is for yourself. Sitting up straight is kind of a fallacy because our spine is meant to curve. But sitting centered is something we can try. Bring your shoulders all the way up to your ears and let them melt down your back so that your chest opens and you have space to breathe. And feel as the breath enters you and pushes against the container of your rib cage. And feel as your belly inflates and deflates every time you take a breath. And try to sit purposefully, thoughtfully in this architecturally created seated posture instead of just sitting down. Try to hold this posture through the space of Elohai Neshama, or maybe if you've really settled in, through the space of the next meditation. And you can have your hands on your lap. They can be palms up and open to receive. Elohai, Elohai, Neshama. Elohai, Elohai, Neshama. Shenata tabi, tehorahi, tehorahi. Ata Yetzarta Ata Nefachta 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 Bi Ve'ata Meshamra 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 Bekirbi Elohai Elohai Neshama Elohai Elohai Neshama Shanata Tabi Tehorahi 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 Tehorahi. And take a deep breath in and release.
Risk. Abraham and Sarah were old, they were childless. By the standards of their society, they were as good as dead. Then God showed up, inviting them on an epic road trip. You have a future, God told them. I made you for a reason. You are part of something so much bigger than just the two of you. Come on, I'll show you. I promise. They left everything they knew and marched out into the desert with its scorpions and bandits to build a life, a family that would survive. 1,000 years later, an early Christian apostle named Paul looked at Abraham and Sarah, trusting God with their lives, and he said, this is what we're supposed to be about. This right here is righteousness. Queer people all over the world live this kind of risk every day. In more than 70 countries, same-sex sexual activity is a criminal offense. In the United States, 44 trans and non-binary people were murdered last year, most of them trans women of color. But we keep telling the truth of our lives. Why? We risk because we feel the hope that Abraham and Sarah felt. Like them, we risk everything to be who we are, to be the people God created us to be. This kind of risk is the verb form of faith. It is active trust in something bigger and stronger than any threat to our individual safety. Wait, am I comparing trust in God with a queer impulse to walk the streets, being who we are? You bet I am. Queer people risk in this way for ourselves, but we also do it for one another. Telling your truth helps me tell mine, and that paves the road to our survival. It's how we help build a better world, and it's also how those of us who are killed live on. And so we risk, knowing that we are part of a life, a love, a truth that cannot die.
When Reverend Edman and I were comparing the steps along the pathway to different ascending steps in our service towards the transmission of Torah, and including all of the essential pieces of what it means to pray on Shabbat morning, it struck me immediately that to enter into communal prayer, moving from the Birchot HaShachar, the Psuke de Zimra, all of this warm-up material that is come as you are, It's mostly inward, introspective, focused. It doesn't matter who's around you. Your talit can be a mess. Your voice can be creaky and croaky, having just rolled out of bed onto the Zoom screen or made your way to your community of worship. But then all of a sudden, we get really serious. We stand up to be counted. The Baruch Hu, which is our call to worship, is something that cannot be done by yourself. You need to be part of a community. You need a minyan of 9 people and a Torah, or ideally 10 or more people, which we are blessed to have today, or else you don't get to be called in the same way to prayer. Because Jewish prayer ideally is a shared communal experience. And so there's a lot of risk here to literally stand up and be counted among community. At different points throughout history, this was life-threatening to be found in a community of Jewish people who were praying together. This Shabbat morning, I want to ask you to purposefully change your perspective. Stand up. Doesn't matter what angle your computer has of your body, can be your most or least attractive angle, that's fine. But if you can, stand up to be counted for the Baruch Hu. Just like we sat with intention, let's try standing with intention, which means feet flat on the floor. Try lifting up your toes and putting them down. Some of us have the ability to put each toe down, and some of us do not. I do not. And separate your feet a little bit. They don't have to be welded together perfectly for you to have a nice, strong stance. And the same thing, bring your shoulders up to your ears. Let your back curve. You can move forward and back, rocking a little bit. This is a very Jewish motion. In Yiddish, it's called shukling. Shake yourself out a little bit so that when you come to stillness, to stand, you can do so alive with your nerve endings tingling. And when it comes time, I want you to bow to the deepest and most comfortable that is available to you this morning. And whether you're doing that in a chair or whether you're standing, you can at least incline your head, or you could take a much deeper forward fold as close to the floor as you can. When we're called this morning, we're going to ask a couple essential questions. Am I awake? Am I prepared? Are you listening to my prayer? Do you hear my voice? Do you understand? Am I awake? Am I prepared? Yada da da da, 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 yada da da da. Am I awake? Am I prepared? Are you listening to my prayer? Do you hear my voice? Can you understand? Am I awake? Am I prepared? Yada da da da, yada da da da. Yada da da da, 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 yada da da da. Barechu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam. da 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 da, ya 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 da 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 da. You can be seated or you can stay standing through the space of our next meditation, wherever your body wants to be.
Touch. You and I are carnal beings, fleshy, with just a little spark of the divine. These bodies of ours need to be touched, and that little spark is always looking for love. But wow, does it make you vulnerable. It can feel so good. It can hurt so much. It's a paradox that to feel the touch of love, you have to risk being terribly wounded. This paradox comes to life in a famous Bible story, Jacob wrestling the angel. Jacob is self-sufficient and devious. He's successful, but also in a way, very alone. One night, an angel intrudes on Jacob's solitude and wrestles with him till dawn. As the sun is about to break, the angel delivers a brutal blow to Jacob's thigh. This touch is the Hebrew word nagah. Jacob will limp for the rest of his life. He'll have to rely on the love and forgiveness of his family, and especially his brother Esau, which means for the first time in his life, he understands who he really is. This divine touch, nagah, wounds him, but it also saves him. Queer people understand nagah innately. Who we are as a people is intimately bound up in who we love and how we love. We know that touching will exact a price, and we do it anyway because we also know that love is absolutely worth it. Queer people do this openly in ways that other people can see. When I see queer people doing this, I know that's God at work. God reaching out to you, to me, showing us how to push past our fear. It's that little spark of the divine, empowering us to find the love, the touch that every single one of us needs.
When we prepare ourselves to utter what many call the central words of our faith, the Shema, we recite text around it that is all oriented around love. And so we have Ahava Rabbah, this prayer that says there is no boundary, there is no upper limit to the love that we can experience that is divine or that we can create as human beings. And on the other end of the Shema, we have a series of obligations, something that I think very much resembles a ketubah, a brit, a covenant between loving partners about what they expect of one another. And woven intrinsically into the center of these two prayers about love is the principle of Torah, that this is a document that touches all parts of our life. And through it, through its study, through its challenge and its questioning, over thousands of years, we have engaged in a communal mission to better define what it means to love God, what it means to love each other, and what it means to be a person capable of love for all of its creative power and for all of its destructive edge. There is nothing more risky and there is nothing more beautiful than to love. We'll sing the very beginning of Ahava Rabbah together. This is a composition that was written by a classmate of mine, Cantor Ben Ellerin, and it's quickly becoming very popular at CVST. We'll see it again very soon. And then we'll transition into the singing of the Shema and the Ve'ahavta, these pieces of Torah, which are sort of prefaced by their own Torah blessing. Ahava Rabbah, Ahavtanu, Ahavtanu, Adonai, Eloheinu, Chemla Gedola, Vitera, Chamalta Aleinu. Bavur avotenu ve'imotenu shebatchu v'cha batalamdeim chukei chayim ken techonenu utlamdenu ken techonenu utlamdenu Vatelamdem chukei chayim, ken techonenu utelamdenu, ken techonenu utelamdenu. Ahava Rabbah, Ahavtanu, Ahavtanu, Adonai, Eloheinu, Chemla Gedola, Vitera, Chamalta Aleinu, Chemla Gedola, Vitera, Chamalta Aleinu. If you're wearing a talit this Shabbat morning, we invite you to gather in the four corners, symbolizing the coming together of our entire community and the moment that will come when we can all walk upright without fear and without shame in preparation for singing the words of the Shema. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Adonai Echad Baruch Shem Kevod Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Leolam Va'ed. In the Ve'ahavta, it is explained to us that these words should never depart from us. No matter where we are, no matter what position we are in, when you lie down, when you rise up, when you're seated in your house, or when you're walking on your way. And so, to prepare ourselves for the next meditation, the next step on the pathway, take that thoughtful seat, or take that thoughtful standing pose. In yoga terms, this would be seated mountain or standing mountain. And bring yourself there consciously. Be prepared to receive teaching. Open up your heart, maybe even close your eyes or unfocus your gaze so you're not focused on anything specifically, but in a sort of in-between, absorbent place to listen and to learn. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם, בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. As we walk along our way, Reverend Edman will bring us to the next stop on our path.
Adoption. My parents were not gay. Don't get me wrong, they had many fine qualities, but this gay girl needed to find other role models to help me understand this part of my identity. For lots of us, queer community becomes an adopted family. We choose one another, and we need one another fiercely. We need one another to find love and also to understand the demands that this identity places on us. One lesson you learn early on is that you have to figure out how to be a family with people who are really different from you, with people you may not understand, and sometimes with people you don't even like. Communities of faith are supposed to be like that. We're about to hear our Haftarah reading this morning from the book of Joshua. It's the story of Rachav, the prostitute who saves the Hebrew spies who have come to scope out Jericho. Although the spies are alien to her, Rachav takes them into her home. She gives them shelter, protects them. And when her king orders her to turn them over, she helps them escape back to their families with the promise that her family will be preserved when the walls come tumbling down. What wedge exists between Rachav and her people of origin? We don't know. What we do know is that she is an independent woman who offers hospitality to a couple of strangers and casts her lot with them and with the God they worship. She knows their history. Did she already know the names of the ancestors that we'll recite in a moment in the Amidah? All we know, and maybe all she knows for sure, is that somehow this family has found her, chosen her, and she chooses them back. She needs this new family and they need her. She makes promises to them and they make promises to her. They trust her with their lives and she trusts them with hers. Together they understand what queer people know in our bones, that adoption is a gift. Our job as adopted children, as people of faith, is to receive the gift, feel our need of it, fulfill our promises to one another, and choose back the one who has chosen us.
We'll begin the opening kavanah the sentence of orientation all together. And then this will be a space for silent prayer for you to use as you wish, whatever you need this morning. If it's an opportunity to go through the well-worn and beloved words of the tradition, to address God as we have for thousands of years, maybe with the queering of who gets to be in our family of origin or our family of choice, the way it's CBST, we expand the definition of matriarch to include Bilhah and Zilpah, those who gave birth to the majority of the 12 tribes. Whether you have another text, another script that you would like to pour over this morning, you might just need some space for quiet to let all of the words that have been washing over you really sink in. And you're always invited to do your own yoga practice in this space. We'll come back together for a communal prayer for peace. And then we'll enter into the study of sacred text. We recite together, Adonai Sifatai Tiftach, Ufi Yagid Tehilatecha, God, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Yada da da da, 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 yada da da da. Adonai Sifatai Tiftach, Ufi Yagid Tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Yada da da da, yada da da da. Yada da da da, 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 yada da da da. May the one who makes peace in the heavens Make peace here on earth and make all of us, all of Israel, all who dwell there, each of us makers of peace. Oh, say shalom, bimromav, say shalom, aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imeru, amen. Oh, say shalom, bimromav, say shalom, aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, ve'imeru, amen. Oh, say shalom, bimromav, say shalom, aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imeru, amen. On this Shabbat, we're reading the Torah portion, Shlach Lecha, which is a narration of an episode in the book of Numbers. Moses sends out 12 spies to reconnoiter the land of Israel and to figure out really what the children of Israel are up against. And 10 spies come back saying one thing, and 2 spies come back saying another thing. 10 spies say that this is a land that eats its inhabitants. It's filled with giants. We are grasshoppers compared to them. But 2 of the spies, Joshua and Caleb, say that there is nothing we can't accomplish with God at our side, and it won't be easy, but we can do this. We can achieve this promise. A lot of people have questions about how on earth the Haftarah portions, the selections from the books of prophets, or more largely the Nevi'im section of Tanakh, which doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's a prophet. It's not always Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, but rather the books that come after Deuteronomy, the story continuing after Moses dies, and much of which happens in situ, in the land of Israel, when the children of Israel have come into the land. It seems pretty arcane how Haftarah portions get matched up with Torah portions. And Haftarah does not actually mean half a Torah. It just sounds like it would. It means an additional reading. And so a theme is usually established in a Torah portion that's picked up by the Haftarah portion. And so you can kind of see the Masoretes at work saying, okay, we have a Torah portion about spies. We have a great story in the book of Joshua, in fact, being one of those 2 spies who was optimistic and didn't overstate the risk and believed in the promise of the promised land. In his book is another story about spies. This time it's Joshua who's sending the spies, and the children of Israel are ready to enter the promised land, but they need to see what they're up against, specifically in the city of Jericho. And this is a beautiful Torah portion for this Shabbat. I love that it gives honor to our incredible guest speaker last night, Jericho Vincent. And it has one of my absolute favorite protagonists in the entire biblical corpus in Rachav. So we're going to focus our study this morning on the study of our Haftarah instead of the study of our Torah. I'll be reciting the Haftarah blessings and chanting the selection on which we will dive more deeply into discussion. And then following our discussion will be a prayer for healing. And so we are going to ask you to save the names of those you pray for healing this morning. They will be the beneficiaries of our study together. But if there is anyone additional for whom you would like to dedicate your learning this morning, please feel free to do so in the chat. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nvi'im tovim v'ratza v'divrehem hane'emarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'torah uv'Moshe avdo uv'Yisrael amo uv'nvi'eh ha'emet v'tzedek. Our Haftarah reading this morning is from the very beginning of the Haftarah portion, Joshua chapter 2. I'll be chanting verses 1 through 6. I'm moving my Zoom ribbon out of the way so I can actually see the whole text. There we go. Vayishlach Yehoshua bin Nun min hashitim Shnayim anashim meraglim cheresh lemor lechu re'u et haaretz et Yericho vayelchu vayavo Beit Isha zona ushma rachav vayishkevu shama vayehi amar lemelech Yericho lemor Heina anashim ba'u Heina halayla mibnei Yisrael lachpor ta'aretz vayishlach melech Yericho el rachav lemor hotzi'i hanashim haba'im elayich asher ba'u leveitech ki lachpur et kol haaretz ba'u vatikach ha'isha et shnei hanashim vatitzpno vatomer chen ba'u elai hanashim V'lo yadati me'ayin hema Vayehi hasha'ar lizkor V'choshech v'hanashim yatza'u lo yadati Anahalchu hanashim ridfu maher Acharehem ki tasigum vehi he'elatam hagaga vatit menehem v'fishteh ha'etz ha'aruchot la al hagag Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam tzur kol haolamim sadik bechol hadorot ha'el hane'eman ha'omer ve'oseh ha'amdaber umkayem shekol devarav emet v'tzedek al haTorah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al hanvi'im Ve'al yom haShabbat hazeh, shenatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu, likdusha v'limnucha, lechavod u'tifaret, al hakol, Adonai Eloheinu anachnu modim lach, umvarchim otach, yitbarach shimcha befi kol chai, tamid leolam va'ed, baruch ata Adonai, mekadesh HaShabbat. So now, having heard a section of the story, we're going to return to the text so that we can look at it more closely. Jumping back to the book of Joshua. So we have Joshua as the appointed leader by God following Moses, who sends these spies from where the children of Israel are camped in Shittim. And they're looking into this major city, a capital city, a walled city called Jericho with its own king. And when they get to Jericho, what is the first thing these spies do? They visit the house of a woman named Rachav, and the Haftarah doesn't pull any punches here. She's known as a zonah, which in modern Hebrew is something you would never say when you're in synagogue, but is an extremely common word in the Hebrew Bible, meaning a prostitute or a harlot, if you want to be really literary about it. And this is just sort of laid out at the very beginning, and kind of unsurprisingly, given her profession, the spies enter her house and they lodge there, they sleep there, they sleep with her there. But the king of Jericho hears that spies have entered the land, and they are now the subject of a manhunt, because no king wants enemy spies checking out the territory. And yet Rachav hides them, and she lies to the king's henchmen. She says, sure, they came to me, but I didn't know where they were from. They left. I don't know where they went, but you quick, run after them because it's getting dark and you could probably still catch them. But all of this time, she had taken the spies up to the roof and hidden them under the flax, the plant material matter that was making up her roof. And she exacts from them a promise saying, I know that Adonai has given the country to you, that this is the destiny of the city of Jericho and the land of Israel. We've heard all about your escapades as you've been moving through the desert. And I have chosen you. I am on your side at great cost to myself and to my family. And so I ask that you choose me back, that you'll spare me, that you'll spare my family. And the spies say, we owe you our lives. And so if you don't out us, if you keep to your promise, you will be saved when the city of Jericho falls. What Reverend Edman and I wanted to focus on was that notorious word in the very first sentence describing Rachav's profession, that she's a sex worker. And we wondered, this is an open question that we really want people to respond to. You can raise your hand virtually. You can wave at us in your Zoom box. We'll try to make sure we see everybody. The easiest way to get our attention is by virtually raising your hand. Do you think that Rachav's role as a prostitute had an impact on the way that she behaved in this story, the risks that she was and wasn't willing to take, and the choices that she made when they were presented in front of her? We can talk a lot about a person's inner qualities, and the Hebrew Bible is famous for not giving us a lot of those, and definitely not in Rachav's case. But we have to wonder, such a marginalized figure, historically such a hierarchically oppressed and persecuted figure of a prostitute, of sex workers, does that impact the decisions that she made based on the professional life that she leads? What do you think? I see Stacy's hand raised. And I also see Sherry. Go right ahead, Stacy, and everybody else, put your thoughts in the chat, raise your hands. You'll be next in line.
I think that when on the outside, when you hear the word prostitute, it's like this. It can be aesthetic. Oh, okay, this is how somebody learns how to have sex, or whatever the case may be. What people don't realize is that whatever terminology is used for a person, whether it's their profession or not, is that they really are a person. They have, one doesn't know why or how or whatever the reason why they're doing whatever they're doing, but we forget somehow or other that because it's like a connotation that this person doesn't have a heart or intelligence.
Ooh, thank you, Stacy. I think that's really important to sort of build out our own biases, assumptions, and the cultural content that's delivered to us about what it means to be a sex worker. That's really insightful. Thank you. All right, I saw Sherry next. Sherry, what are you thinking?
I think that to be a sex worker in any society, you have to be very brave and you have to be very independent thinking. And I think that's how she had the courage and the wherewithal to help them the way she did.
Yeah, and I'm seeing some notations in the chat. People are sharing their thoughts there. And Sherry, I think that they're very much building out what you're presenting here. That, Doug points out that a lot of people don't do this voluntarily. That as Mark says, her clientele must have been predominantly abusive cheapskates. And this is, when a profession or when a line of work is considered necessary, but shall we say undignified, or shall we say looked down upon, lots of different ways we could describe this, you are at the very, very margins. And so it takes a lot of, and Sherry, I love the way that you described the essential qualities a person has to have. You have to be really courageous, and you have to be really independent, and you have to have a lot of seichel. You have to have a lot of know-how. And it's a dangerous line of work. Doug was also pointing out that she may have been trafficked. And yeah, Doug, you're absolutely right that the profession of sex workers on the gender binary, male and female and in between, these are ancient descriptions of the way that people operated in the world. And we see a lot of them in the Hebrew Bible. We often don't talk about them, but they are some of the most important stories we have, including the story of Tamar and Judah, our namesake, and Tamar, who is the progenitress of the ever so many greats grandmother of King David, which means that she is the progenitress of the idea of Mashiach, of Messiah. So thank you, Sherry. I saw Judy Frank next. Go right ahead, Judith. You are muted. I think it was because I was trying to unmute you and you were trying to unmute yourself at the same time.
I think because she worked at her job that she had, she was like considered off, outside of the mainstream, so that not only did she have not much to lose, but she was also, I think, outcast from a lot of people in that society. So she just did it because she knew what it was like to be pursued by other people. And so I think that's why she hid them. That was just outside the box.
That's beautiful. So you're seeing empathy in her for the situation of the spies. I do want to push back on the idea that, might not have much to lose. I don't want to undervalue Rechav's courage, but I would argue she has a lot to lose. Like, to lose one's life is a very, very steep price. And, I'm only reading context clues into this because she's asking for the protection of her family when the spies return with their army. But it sounds like she's not the only one who would be punished if her treasonous act, let's call it what it is, were to be found out. It sounds like it's her entire family. So I think she has a great deal to lose, even though she is not allotted much in society. But yeah, Judy, I think that's a beautiful, beautiful reading, that Rechav must have known what it was like to be pursued, to be marginalized, and that made her more empathetic to the spies' situation. Sarah, and I also see Peter. Sarah, can you unmute yourself? If not, then I will unmute you. Nope, okay, unmute.
Shabbat Shalom. I can't help but think of the way sex work especially plays in a lot of the lives of our trans siblings, and the way that often our trans siblings have to resort to sex work to support themselves, and thinking about how that further marginalizes many of our trans siblings and individuals, and thinking how not only are they marginalized because of their trans identity, but they're also marginalized because of their status of sex work, and which is already seen as so low on the totem pole. And I can think of, especially I'm a big true crime fan, and thinking about the way, especially like the death of the murder of a sex worker is treated compared to someone else and stuff like that. Just thinking about how marginalized these individuals are, and how which my point is how brave it is to be, again, just commending her the courage and her empathy and stuff like that.
Thank you, Sarah, for bringing this into a contemporary perspective, that, this story just isn't crystallized in time. It has roots that extend all the way up to today. Thank you.
Can I jump in on that one for a second?
Yes, please.
That's that connection between transness and sex work, or queerness and sex work, is so important. And you're talking about folks who are not only marginalized but also policed. Like, I'm thinking about how back during the height of the HIV/AIDS pandemic, you'd have young men who would come into the Port Authority, and there was all this sex work taking place under there, and they were largely ignored. But if there was a problem, the cops were right there. And you hear that in this story. One of the things that really stands out for me is the fact that the king knows to go to Rechav to see where these guys are. And maybe they slipped there thinking, she's going to be under the radar. Well, she's not. And it may well be that her life is this juxtaposition of being totally ignored and marginalized and policed at the same time.
Thank you. That really complexifies the narrative, and not something I was looking at on its surface. But yeah, how did and why is it not surprising that Rechav is the very first stop for police to knock on the door? Peter, what are you thinking?
A couple of thoughts. One, sex workers are probably used to keeping people's secrets a lot more than others. Their clientele often about what they do, and here are spies coming, trying to be unnoticed. And just like queer people, you have a multitude of secrets that may need to be kept. The other thing that jumped out at me was this concept of her care for her family, that she's not disconnected from her family. She sees still a sense of obligation and love and connectedness. And it actually reminded me of my great aunt Tessie, who was a sex worker in New York in the early part of the 20th century. And it was a bit of the family secret, but it was Aunt Tessie, my grandfather's sister, who supported the rest of the family during the Depression. her business didn't go away.
Right.
And so as I've raised my own children, telling them the stories about their many illustrious ancestors, I never miss an opportunity to tell them about Aunt Tessie, without whom many members of the family would have probably starved and all. So I think as we judge folks by their profession or by their queerness or by their outsidedness, sometimes we have to step back and remember that maybe these folks actually are central to the narrative, and maybe they are the heroes. Maybe that's why you're such a fan of Rahab, that the most unlikely can be the hero, the same way that the stone becomes the Rosh Pinah.
Beautiful, Peter. Oh my goodness. Yeah, so Peter's quoting our very favorite Psalm, Psalm 118, that says that the stone that the builders rejected became the cornerstone, the Rosh Pinah. And the LGBTQ synagogue, seeing this is so central to our identity that, you know, others may have thrown us away, but we are not only essential, you know, everything falls down without us. And Peter, I am so struck by the story of your Aunt Tessie and the way that you've kept her legacy alive into these next generations. And you're absolutely right that, you know, so many of the features that you're describing in history, but definitely more recently than Rahab, continue to be true, that it is considered an essential worker status, that like there isn't a moment in history where sex work doesn't exist. In the most autocratic, authoritarian, extremely conservative regimes, it's not like this just disappears. And so you're right, I don't think it's surprising that we have these heroes and heroines, these extraordinary protagonists of all genders, who come from this background of ingenuity and working around the margins to very much save the day, you know. And we think about the stories that Reverend Edman was telling about the early days of the AIDS pandemic. We think about who was gathered in the Stonewall Inn. I want to make sure that, so Doug made a very astute comment in the chat that, you know, Rahab might be weighing her options very carefully, and she knows what's out there for her in the kingdom of Jericho. And who knows how she may fare in a nation run by the children of Israel, but at the very least, they're going to owe her a major, major favor. And to Peter's point about how she immediately thinks of her family and draws her family into this destiny, I think is really fascinating, because Peter, you said it very well, you know, her family's not far from her mind. She is very connected to them in this way. And I think there's a lot of room for midrashic interpretation about whether or not Rahab was close with her family, or whether or not, despite marginalization, if that is her first thought. And so, you know, Peter, your Aunt Tessie was the benefactress of her entire family. And I wonder if for her that was received with the level of gratitude that she really deserved or not. And I wonder how Rahab's family felt about her profession and the way they treated her, and how they felt when they had her to thank for their survival. Are there other things that people want to share? Peter, I hadn't put your hand down, so if there was something else you wanted to add. No, you're good. And Reverend Edman, were there other threads that you wanted to? That's accidentally very punny, because the signal that Rahab and the spies agree on, so that they'll know this is her house. And when the children of Israel storm Jericho, how are we going to know where you are? Take this thread, take this length of crimson cord, and that'll be our signal between each of us. But Reverend Edman, anything you want to add?
No, the only other thing that really caught my eye in the text, and we haven't read it, is that it says that her house is built in the wall.
Mm.
Her house is in the wall. So she exists in this liminal space between, like she's between the Hebrew people, the tribe that's out in the desert, and her own city.
Wow.
It is that, she's busting the binaries right there. She's queer in so many ways. Love that.
She lived in the actual wall is the way Safaria likes to translate this.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So she lives on the margin. She lives on that line betwixt and between. And she lives in the threshold, in the doorway, which is the way that many, many of us live between one thing and another, define each entity on either side of the threshold, but the threshold experience is a deeply Jewish experience, and it is a deeply human experience. Well, thank you everybody for the vulnerability it takes to dive into Torah study of many stripes, for opening up about what is a radical and controversial story, and for sharing these pieces of yourselves in community. You have all been our teachers, and we are extraordinarily grateful for this. It is our custom to have a prayer for healing each Shabbat. And so if you are praying for the healing of someone you love, someone you know, someone you're thinking of on this particular Shabbat, please share their names in the chat. At CBST, we hold in our hearts the names of Kathy Binder, Johnson Kota, Danny Ettinger, Chaim Shalom Ben Freda, Joan Friedman, Yehuda Aryeh Ben Golda Yitzchak, Anne Gregory, Stuart Isikoff, Linda Kenepensky, Myrna Klein, Morris Levy, Justine Loeb, Saul Mizrahi, John Musco, Stanley Perlberg, Monique Prince, Susan Ricken, Liz Scott, Elena Schumann, Pam Trester, Irva Shivad, Rose Wanan, and Jay Weinstein. We, of course, include in our healing prayers all of those who are currently afflicted with COVID-19 in the CBST community and at large, and the thousands of immigrant children in US custody, most of whom are separated from their families and who remain separated and alone. This morning, we wanted to share a particular setting for the prayer for healing, which we have used in this minyan before. It's from the book of Psalms, and it is referring to God as healer of the brokenhearted. Within it, you see Moses's plea to God that occurred in just last week's Torah portion, Ana Elna Rafana La, please God, heal her, please, speaking of his sister Miriam. Healer of the brokenhearted, binder of their wounds, counter of uncountable stars, you know where they are. Healer of the brokenhearted, binder of our wounds, counter of uncountable stars, you know who we are. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Ana Elna Rafana La, Ana Elna Rafana La, healer of the brokenhearted, binder of their wounds, counter of uncountable stars, you know where they are. Healer of the brokenhearted, binder of our wounds, counter of uncountable stars. You know who we are. Hallelujah. 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 Take once again that thoughtful seat. Open up your breath. Open up your heart. And maybe close your eyes. We have been moving through a pathway of identity, risk, touch, and adoption. And now we come to the last stop on this journey.
Scandal. The Oxford English Dictionary defines scandal as an event, action or event causing general public outrage. When you Google it, you get these synonyms: outrageous wrongdoing, immoral behavior, shocking incident. Queer people know a lot about scandal and the shame it breeds. We have long been cast as undignified, as morally outrageous. So hey, we've claimed the turf. You need me to be a scandal for your impoverished worldview? Well, honey, so be it. Michael Warner says that when queer people embrace scandal, we create an ethical vision for ourselves. The rule, he says, is this: get over yourself, put a wig on before you judge, and the corollary is that you stand to learn the most from the people you think are beneath you. I bet lots of folks in Jericho thought Rachav was beneath them. Heck, the spies probably thought she was beneath them, even as they received her hospitality. Her entire story reeks of scandal, with allusions that are unmistakably sexual. The spies enter her home and stay the night. Later, she takes them up to the roof and covers them with stalks of flax, a story that sounds a lot like Ruth sidling up to Boaz on the threshing room floor, and we all know what they were doing there. In so many ways, Rachav is a queer figure occupying liminal space. But does her queerness paralyze her? Does Rachav cower in shame at her scandalousness? She does not. In fact, as the story progresses, she just dives more and more deeply into the scandal. Rachav has been listening to the scuttlebutt about this tribe in the desert and the power of their God, and she wants a piece of that. Takes a special kind of chutzpah for this Jericho prostitute to claim her power and declare that Adonai is God in heaven above and earth below, which, if you think about it, may be the most scandalous part of the story and the most liberating. As queers, as Jews, as people of faith, whatever identity has brought you here this morning, we are called to look scandal in the eye and deny its power to control us. This is how we break the shackles of whatever shame we have known. This is how we affirm the dignity of every human being. This is one of the most important ways that we participate in building a better world for all of us.
the concluding prayer, Aleinu l'shabeach, is just such a scandalous work of liturgy. It has the audacity, the chutzpah, to imagine what a world looks like where God's name is one and God's vision is complete. But it says that we are not to wait. This won't magically happen. It is up to us to praise God's name, to be in God's service. Each of us has an immense amount of power, no matter where we fall on society's hierarchical scale, to create change, to bring people in, and to repair the world more fully. The language of Aleinu l'shabeach has also been extraordinarily scandalous over time. It was outlawed in some countries. And to say that we have a particular destiny, its traditional formulation says that the Jewish people are chosen. And in some medieval and post-medieval societies, communities use this as a cathartic exercise to expel the demons of oppression and persecution that they faced, that others worshipped gods that were only hevel varik, that ether and spit. Not a very attractive description of other faiths. And yet you can hear the pathos in that language of a community that only sees itself as holy when in the presence of one another. And so at CBST, we have queered this blessing in its language, thanks to some of the brilliant liturgists in our community, like Jack Greenberg, to say that there is unique destiny out there for all of us, that particularity is not the scandalous act. Everyone is singular and sacred, but there's many opportunities for service and for worship and for praise that come in different languages, that come from different faiths, that come in different voices, and there's space enough for us all. This morning, we'll be sharing one line of that blessing, V'hashevota el levavcha. Take these words and let them sink into your heart with their weight. Ki Adonai hu ha'Elohim, God is one. And then we'll close with the Torah citation, the Ne'emar, as it is written, V'haya Adonai lamelech al kol ha'aretz, God who reigns over all the earth. There is a day that will come where God's name shall be one and God's promise shall be one. So I invite you to rise to a standing mountain pose if you are able, to bring that real presence and intention to your stance. And you can repeat these words after me. V'hashevota el levavcha, ki Adonai hu ha'Elohim, v'hashevota el levavecha, ki Adonai hu ha'Elohim, v'ne'emar v'haya Adonai l'melech al kol ha'aretz. Bayom hahu, yeh Adonai echad, u'shemo echad. You can be seated unless it is your custom to be standing when Kaddish Yatom, the mourner's Kaddish, is recited. If you have experienced recent loss, if you are in a period of mourning like Shiva or Shloshim, if it is the 11 months or the Yortzeit following the loss of someone you love, please add their names to the chat so that we can hold them with our own. On this Shabbat, we send our heartfelt condolences to Doug Edelston on the loss of his Uncle Abe, may his memory be for blessing, who died at the age of 92 last Shabbat. We remember our CBST members whose Yortzeits occur in this week: Gary Artz, Jean Dolgen, Aaron Hyman, Sheila Michaels, Ruth Selman, Cecilia Urban, and our friends and family, Velma Alcorn, Richard Austin, Alfred Basla, Morris Deutsch, Naomi Elson, Brian Feinsilver, Estelle Greenberg, Paula Ingerman Zeller, Bertram Kartzman, Charlotte Katz, Victor Kossow, Ellen Leipzig, Dawn Leshin, Florence Levine, Leslie Myers, Solomon Pavlov, Betty Rosenfeld, Alexander Sasson, Leslie Schneider, Michael Stowe, Betty Sull, Cecilia Winshower, William Zalen, and Claire Zarinsky. We offer condolences to the families, friends, and communities of all of those who are dying each day from the COVID-19 pandemic. As of today, the total numbers of deaths were, from the beginning of Shabbat, 33,184 in New York City, 53,529 in New York State, 607,780 across the United States, and 3,531,425 worldwide. We'll be sharing the words of Kaddish on the screen for everyone to follow along, and I invite you to recite it along with me or to answer me, as it is your custom. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divrach yeroteh ve'amlich malchuteh, b'chayechon uvyomechon uvchaye dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uvizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach leolam u'almei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yitalev v'yitalal, shemei dekudsha brichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tush b'chata v'nechemata, damiran be'alma v'imru, amen. Yehei shlama Rabbah min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, v'imru, amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, ve'imeru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imeru amen. Zichronam livracha, may all of these souls, may their memories be for blessing. On this first Shabbat of Pride Month, Martin Bruner, beloved CBS team member and lay leader, approached me and said, I have the perfect song. I have a song that tells an incredible story, and we all know Martin has extraordinary taste in music. So he has unmuted himself, Mazel Tov. Martin, I am going to share the words on the screen, and Martin is going to introduce us to our beautiful closing song.
Good morning. What a gorgeous and heartbreaking Shabbat this has been. I am so broken up and full of inspiration from Reverend Edman. And I wanted to share the song. When I was 14, I was really hitting puberty, and I was desperate for some sort of understanding of what was happening to me. I was beginning to see that I was really attracted to men, and how impossible was that? And as a young folk singer, I happened upon this song, which is actually a jazz standard at this time, who was made famous by Nat King Cole. And I said to myself, who is this person? And I thought to myself, they're kind of like me, maybe. Later on, as I began to study spirituality and mysticism, I also saw echoes of this in the scriptures. And what we've heard today has been really wonderful, and what we heard yesterday. And I'm also thinking of, in the mystical tradition, Elijah was considered the green man, and he would just kind of appear to people at various stages. So maybe he was the nature boy. Who is he, and who are we? But somehow we're connected. So I see that I see this song as like a mystical nigun, a queer mystical nigun that reaches through and reminds us that we're here and we always have been. So let me try this for you, okay? There was a boy, a very strange, enchanted boy. They say he wandered very far, over land and sea. A little shy and sad of eye, but very wise was he. And then one day, one magic day, he passed my way. And as we spoke of many things, fools and kings, this he said to me: the greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. The greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved
Martin, what a beautiful blessing for this Shabbat and for all of Pride Month. May each of us love and be loved in return. So together, let us recite blessings for all of the things that we love to enjoy over the rest of our Shabbat, for good things to drink, for good things to eat. And we'll share the words on the screen to Vishamru, this passage from Deuteronomy. That is something of a love song between God and the Jewish people. Shabbat being this unbelievably personalized gift that was given as a sign, an everlasting covenant between God and the children of Israel, so that we might always remember creation and we might always remember to rest. So Jason, that is the last slide on the deck. There we go. And if you have something to say Kiddush over, please raise it with me and join me in singing Vishamru. Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat, l'dorotam berit olam. Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat, l'dorotam berit olam. Beini uvein b'nei Yisrael, oti leolam, oti leolam. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat, l'dorotam berit olam. Ki sheshet yamim Asa Adonai et hashamayim ve'et haaretz v'shamru v'nei Yisrael et hashabat la'asot et hashabat l'dorotam berit olam. Uvayom hashvi'i shavat vayinafash, shavat vayinafash, shavat vayinafash, v'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat l'dorotam berit olam. And so raise your glasses in a toast to life with me. Savri chavrai v'chavrotai, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Borei peri hagafen. L'chaim. And we reach out towards one another for all of the things that sustain us, mostly delicious, gluten-full, but also gluten-free and ephemeral kinds of nourishment. Yes, Reverend Edman is holding our sacrificial challah this morning, and we've got some great emojis in the chat. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. The Te'avon. We hope you enjoy. Thank you so much for joining us for this first Shabbat morning of Pride Month. Thank you endlessly to Reverend Edman. Reverend Edman has written a book called Queer Virtue, in which all of these stops on the pathway are more clearly defined, and what has been exceedingly meaningful to me is to learn from them in the language of her tradition. And it was something that I did not know a lot about to start with, but she is a remarkable educator and communicator and brought me right in. And I really can't recommend it highly enough. Thank you to Martin for bringing such beautiful music to our celebration of Shabbat. Your taste is all